Skinwalkers among us. In the merciless core of the desert, a chilling ordeal begins to unfold. I find myself hunched beside a lively campfire, sharing its soothing warmth with an aged tribesman whose eyes are misty gateways to dimensions drenched in time-worn tales. He spins stories of skinwalkers, his words waltzing on the night breeze. As a creature of ceaseless urban tumult, I'm drawn toward dismissing these narratives as simple tribal folklore. Yet there's an uncanny cadence in his voice that sends unease racing down my spine. Underneath the expansive celestial quilt, I fight to ignore his words that reverberate eerily through the sharp desert evening. He talks of entities capable of morphing their forms, enticing unsuspecting souls with familiar visages before revealing their true monstrous identities. Sleep is an elusive specter that night. Each whisper of wind and nocturnal bird call sounds like hushed secrets exchanged in soft murmurs. Then it commences, a gentle scratching against canvas, a sound that intensifies and becomes more persistent over time. My heart pounds in my chest, threatening to burst forth. Illuminating a flashlight isn't an option for fear of attracting whatever lurks outside nearer. Instead, I seize my phone and hastily type out a plea to Naomi, our park ranger, begging for assistance. Something's scratching at my tent. Unfortunately, the signal is absent in this barren wilderness. The scratching amplifies, followed by a gruff growl that triggers another surge of goosebumps. Suddenly, silence falls and hangs heavily until disrupted by something large pressing against my frail sanctuary. An escape attempt unfolds, but as my fingers fumble with the zipper, something presses its face against the tent fabric, its eyes glowing with an eerie light that feels as if it's impaling my soul. The creature emits a sickening stench, a vile blend of decay and raw nature. Its growl resonates so powerfully that the ground beneath me almost trembles. This isn't merely some beast, it's terror personified. Panicked, I scream and dash into the advancing darkness, abandoning my phone in the process. The sound of pursuit echoes, but I dare not risk glancing back. A cabin materializes in the distance, and despite the searing pain from running in my bare feet, I muster every bit of strength to reach it. I knock desperately on the door, calling for Naomi. The door creaks open, unveiling an old woman. Her visage is a chronicle of existence, each crease bearing witness to her struggles with the merciless desert winds and the unyielding progression of time. Her gaze, as piercing as fragments of shattered glass, betrays no shock at my disordered state. "Enter," she beckons with a voice that's both gentle and commanding. My exhausted legs give way and I crumble onto the rough-hewn wooden floor. She stoops next to me, her sunburnished hands tender as they examine the fresh injury on my arm. "Naomi is absent," she declares serenely, her calmness sending chills down my back. "But you are precisely where destiny intended." I squint up at her through exhaustion-fogged eyes. "Who are you? Where am I?" "Nita," she replies, "you're sheltered for now. Safe for now." These words fail to soothe the fear brewing within me like a seething pot of terror at my core. Nita kindles a lantern, and its comforting radiance bathes the bare room. One chair, a cot, and a table scattered with herbs and eerie animal bones. Over mugs of tea tasting of mint laced with an earthy hint, Nita unfolds her story. She is both healer and protector against unseen dangers lurking in the stark desert encircling us, threats such as skinwalkers who gorge on fear, my inner shadows, and are attracted to it like moths to light. A tide of remorse engulfs me as I remember dismissing the elder's cautions and how it nearly claimed my life. Nita passes me an ancient leather pouch holding a small stone that emits a faint luminescence. "A barrier," she elucidates, "to mask your fear and render you invisible to the skinwalker." That night I huddle in a corner of the cabin, gripping the stone firmly in my clammy hand. Each sigh of the desert wind outside sends tremors coursing down my back. But the anticipated assault never arrives. In the dawn, Nita devises her plan. She can't annihilate the skinwalker but can debilitate it, severing its link to the darkness it feasts on. Her method is a ritual involving enigmatic incantations and herbs with a bittersweet scent. As Nita intones, an unseen force permeates the air, making it throb with energy. The wind roars outside in protest while sweat pearls on Nita's furrowed forehead. With a fierce yell, she hurls a handful of flaming herbs toward an open window. A beastly shriek reverberates through the desert before silence descends like a weighty pall. Nita collapses back, her face as white as chalk. It's wounded, she wheezes out, but still lethal. She hands me a map and directs me to follow the northern path back to safety at the ranger station. Departing is hard. I've grown attached to this harsh yet mesmerizing land that is both stunningly beautiful and fatal. The return trip is a haze of blistering sun and barren landscapes. Bruised but not defeated, I finally reach sanctuary at the ranger station where Naomi discovers me. Her relief morphs into astonishment as I narrate my ordeal, dismissed as hallucinations induced by dehydration and terror, but deep within me, I know better. The skinwalker likely continues to hide in the shadowy recesses of that desert. Its fiery eyes and foul stench are forever seared into my memory. The barren wasteland seized a part of me, the city dweller who once scoffed at age-old fables, yet in its merciless grip, it bequeathed an invaluable treasure, an understanding of enigmatic forces that lie just beyond the reach of our comprehension. It instilled within me a profound reverence for the wisdom woven into the fabric of fireside narratives, stories pulsating with raw truths and stark warnings for those bold enough to listen and learn. The Wellspring. The vibrant veins of the city throb beneath my gaze, a pulsating display against the pitch-black tapestry of night. It's another Friday, another cycle of guiding faceless passengers to their destinations in my reliable Subaru. The engine's rhythmic drone is a soothing lullaby, contrasting with the city's relentless vitality. Then it comes, a ping. An address on the outskirts appears as an anomaly but not unheard of. Easy cash before retiring for the night. He materializes from the murky shadows of a dim alleyway, swathed in a threadbare trench coat that seems to swallow the feeble glow of the streetlights. His face remains hidden under his fedora when he opens the car door, only a sliver of moonlight betraying an eerie calmness in his eyes. "Where to?" I ask, trying to maintain my usual jovial tone despite his presence sending shivers down my spine. In a gravelly whisper reminiscent of wind sifting through autumn leaves, he says, "Take me to the Wellspring." My GPS yields no results. "I'm not sure I know that place," I say, while stealing cautious glances at him through the rearview mirror. He remains an enigmatic silhouette. "You will," he replies. "Follow the signs. Let the moon be your guide." Ignoring my gut instinct telling me that something's off, I drive into the winding streets beyond the city's neon glow. The low and swollen moon casts spectral shadows that dance across the deserted roads. The only signs are cryptic messages on decaying walls. "Seek the Wellspring. Baptism awaits. Lost souls find solace." As we delve deeper into this unknown territory, silence descends like a heavy cloak. It replaces the city's hum with unsettling chirps from unseen insects and rustling wind through bare trees. My phone struggles for a signal, rendering the GPS useless. Fear tightens its grip on me. Then in the distance, a flickering light appears like a lighthouse in an abyss. As we draw nearer, I realize it's emanating from a clearing where a rundown well stands, its stone rim overrun with moss and weeds. The figure steps out, his features still concealed by the hat, and circles the well while murmuring an incantation. "What's going on?" I stammer, fear making my voice hoarse. "The cleansing," he replies. "You too are tainted. The Wellspring offers renewal." Before I can react, he seizes my arm with a surprisingly strong grip and pulls me toward the well. Despite my resistance, it feels as though an unseen force is propelling me forward. He drives me relentlessly toward the precipice, his breath hot and alien against my ear, uttering indecipherable syllables in a language that twists my stomach into knots. A primal fear, raw and unfiltered, surges through my veins like molten lead, freezing me in place even as it urges me to flee. This is not a simple stumble amidst an otherwise mundane journey. It's a freefall into the abyss of insanity, where reality twists and warps beyond recognition, and the commonplace morphs into something monstrous and unrecognizable. A horrifying shriek reverberates from the depths of the well, not a human sound, but a tortured wail that feels like it could rip through the fabric of reality. My screams join in before both fade into silence. When I regain consciousness, dawn has broken, painting the sky a bruised lilac. My head throbs with fragmented memories of fear and chilling darkness. I scramble away from the well's edge, which now stands empty. No sign of him or anything unusual. Back at the city limits, my trembling hands dial up the police, who find no trace of any oddity at the well site. or evidence supporting my claims, leading them to dismiss it as an overactive imagination fueled by alcohol. But I know better. His cold touch, those chilling whispers, and the wellspring are etched onto my soul like grotesque tattoos of terror. As weeks turn into months, anxiety lingers like a nightmare refusing to end until the night I spot him again. Same trench coat, same fedora, and the same chilling emptiness in his eyes. He stands across the street watching me. His teeth under the moonlight are elongated, sharp, and glistening with a sadistic sheen. His eyes radiate an otherworldly glow that mirrors the pulsating light from a nearby well. He beckons me closer while that chilling mantra echoes in my mind. Seek the wellspring. Baptism awaits. Panic takes over and I slam on the gas, tires screeching as I speed away into the safety of a fresh day. I never lay eyes on him again, but every moonlit night brings back echoes of the wellspring. I see his face in every crowd and hear his whispers in every gust of wind. I'm forever marked by this terrifying truth. I was caught in a horrifying paradox. I know he's still out there waiting for another desperate soul seeking solace in the wrong places. I'm no longer just an Uber driver. Somehow, I've become a beacon unknowingly attracting those vulnerable to the wellspring's lure. Blinds wide shut. Mrs. Peabody always kept her blinds shut, even on the sunniest days. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse through a crack. A flash of something inhuman, something not quite right, reflected in the polished mahogany furniture lining her living room. The whispers started soon after, carried on the wind like dead leaves, about strange rituals, about sacrifices under the blood moon. Initially, I brushed off the murmurs as mere tittle-tattle of a small town, sparked by the ennui of rural living and Mrs. Peabody's peculiar hermit-like behavior. Then arrived the odor, a loathsome blend of decay and unidentifiable spices that slithered beneath my door like a poisonous snake. It permeated my garments and invaded my dreams, serving as an incessant reminder of the concealed atrocities behind Mrs. Peabody's perpetually shut blinds. Curiosity gnawed at me until one moonlit night when I finally succumbed to it. Stealthily approaching her window, I managed to take a peek through a slight opening in the curtains. What met my eyes chilled me to my core. In the middle of her room stood Mrs. Peabody atop a sigil sketched in chalk, uttering incantations in an alien language that grated against every fiber of my sanity. The flickering candlelight around her threw grotesque shadows on the walls, unveiling cages filled with twitching creatures of abnormality. At the heart was an altar bearing a silver chalice brimming with a thick liquid that gave off an otherworldly luminescence. I stifled a gasp as realization dawned upon me. She wasn't just some harmless old woman. She was something far more sinister, a gateway to unimaginable horrors. Terror urged me to bolt, but morbid fascination held me rooted in place as I watched her plunge a ceremonial blade into one caged creature whose screams reverberated through the night, a tormented soul being devoured. The moment its blood touched the chalice, darkness pulsed throughout the room. Mrs. Peabody's laughter morphed into an inhuman symphony of ravenous whispers. The being turned toward her, its eyes aflame with an unholy fire. Instead of fear, Mrs. Peabody's face exhibited a perverse reverence. The entity reached out for her, and she willingly spread her arms, offering herself to the horrific apparition. I ran then, but the memory of Mrs. Peabody's gruesome embrace was seared into my mind. Weeks passed by with the stench still lingering in the air, an ever-present reminder of the malevolence lurking behind those closed blinds. Finally, I could no longer hold my silence, and I confided in the sheriff about what I had witnessed. He dismissed me outright, as did most townsfolk whose fear was overshadowed by disbelief. But some believed me, their eyes flickering with dread. Underneath another blood moon, Mrs. Peabody's ritual commenced again. This time we were prepared. A band of us armed with rudimentary weapons and driven by desperation stormed Mrs. Peabody's house, leading to a savage and bloody battle between us and shadows. We succeeded in shutting down the portal, but not before one of our own was torn apart by the entity. His agonizing screams intertwined with the entity's unearthly laughter, serving as a grim reminder of our audacity's price. Mrs. Peabody disappeared into the darkness she had summoned, leaving behind the scar of evil. Some doors should remain forever closed, some whispers left unanswered. Even now that house sits empty, and every time a blood moon rises, I feel a sense of unease as I catch fleeting movements from behind the shut blinds. And if I listen carefully enough, I can still hear Mrs. Peabody's incantations and the wails of the being within, eager to claim another soul. The Sinister Neighbor. Old Man Henderson lived next door, his yard an untamed jungle of rusted lawnmowers and gnome statues with unsettlingly realistic grins. My dog Sparky disappeared the day I moved in. Mr. Henderson offered condolences, a twinkle in his cloudy eyes and a disturbingly meaty aroma clinging to his clothes. "Don't worry," he chuckled, patting his stomach. "Sparky won't be lonely long." Let's just say, becoming friends with the neighbors wasn't part of the moving plan. The calm night was punctuated by eerie croaks and grunts that seeped from the wilderness of Mr. Henderson's neglected backyard. Each dawn, the gnomes appeared to have shifted positions slightly, their smiles broadening into sinister grins, their glassy eyes reflecting a macabre delight. Slumber turned into a war zone, plagued by nightmares of gnomes reveling beneath a crimson moon. In desperation, I dared to tread on the forbidden terrain of Mr. Henderson's yard. Abandoned tools rusted under the speckled sunlight, their sharp edges threateningly visible. The scent of damp soil mixed with decay overpowered my senses as I ventured deeper. Then my gaze fell upon it, a gnawed bone lying amidst the roots of a gnarled oak tree and Sparky's collar nearby, his name etched onto the worn leather. A wave of nausea washed over me as my heart pounded against my ribcage. As twilight smeared the sky in violent purples and blues, Mr. Henderson's back door groaned open. He stepped out, his face distorted by the lantern light he carried. He paused briefly to inhale deeply, resembling a famished predator on the prowl. "Ah, you found Sparky," he rasped in a voice that scraped against my nerves. "My little buddy makes quite a hearty stew." A cold knot of terror formed in my gut at his words. This wasn't just an eccentric old man, but something far more horrifying lurking beneath human skin. I recoiled instinctively, fear-fueled adrenaline driving me toward my home, when suddenly he lunged at me with laughter echoing from his throat and twisted fingers outstretched. Just then, an agonizing howl shattered the silence of nightfall. From within the shadows emerged Sparky, or what was left of him, matted fur slick with an unidentifiable substance, eyes burning with preternatural light. He snarled, baring his teeth, and launched himself at Mr. Henderson, his once docile nature replaced by savage ferocity. In the ensuing pandemonium, I clambered over the fence, the sounds of snarls and spine-chilling screams reverberating in my ears. I didn't halt my frantic sprint until I was safely on the main street, tears blurring my vision. The following morning brought news of Mr. Henderson's mutilated remains discovered by local law enforcement. Sparky had disappeared into the obscurity of nightfall. The gnomes were now devoid of their eerie smiles, but the smell of raw meat mingled with damp earth still hung heavy in the air. A truth best left undisturbed in that nightmare-infested yard. I relocated shortly thereafter, haunted by silent screams from stone gnomes and Sparky's monstrous growl imprinted onto my memory. The lesson was carved deep within me. It is wise to maintain distance from certain neighbors and keep some doors firmly bolted shut. For beneath layers of normalcy lurks an insidious darkness ready to devour any unsuspecting soul who dares to lift the veil of pretense. And sometimes, even a cherished pet can become a horrific reminder that there are entities better left undiscovered than unearthed. The pie secret. The first time Mrs. Higgins offered me a slice of her special pie, the stench of formaldehyde was so thick it nearly curdled the milk in my glass. But in a town like Hollow Creek, where secrets festered longer than winter chills, politeness trumped common sense. I took a bite, the sickly sweetness clinging to my throat like a bad omen. Mrs. Higgins, a skeletal figure with eyes shrouded in perpetual sorrow, erupted into a chilling laugh. "Oh, it pleases your palate. A cherished family secret handed down from my grandmother's time." I managed a tight-lipped grin, the acrid aftertaste of embalming fluid roiling my insides. Hollow Creek's residents murmured about Mrs. Higgins and her peculiar pies, yet these murmurings remained hushed whispers. No one dared to voice their suspicions aloud. As days melded into weeks, the special pie became a frequent treat. Each mouthful was akin to Russian roulette. Sometimes it was filled with harmless blackberry, while other times it held an unsettling mixture that tasted eerily of lilies and decay. Fear gnawed at my nerves, but the oppressive silence that hung over Hollow Creek kept me mute. On a night devoid of moonlight, I was roused by a guttural scraping outside my window. Peering through the curtain gap, I spotted Mrs. Higgins laboring in the graveyard, her shovel glinting like an exposed bone. The sight stirred a morbid curiosity within me that waged war against fear itself. What secrets lay buried beneath that cold earth? The next morning was tainted by the unmistakable odor of formaldehyde. Mrs. Higgins proffered another slice of pie with a victorious gleam dancing in her eyes. This time there was no doubt, not from the smell but from spotting a gold tooth nestled within the filling, identical to one gleaming in last night's moonlight. Fear strangled my scream before it could escape my throat as I flung the pie across the room where it splattered against the wall, revealing an arcane symbol hidden under peeling wallpaper. Mrs. Higgins's laughter echoed around the room, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. At last you understand. Our town craves sustenance and I provide it. You either join us or become part of the feast. Terror lent wings to my feet as I bolted out into Hollow Creek's winding streets. Every shadow came alive with the horrifying secrets I had unearthed. Every whispered tale wielding a bone-chilling reality. The scent of formaldehyde clung to me like a morbid cologne, marking me as both an accomplice and target. My flight from Hollow Creek was a whirlwind of blind running and ignored cries for help until I found myself trapped in the graveyard, surrounded by Mrs. Higgins and her followers forming a grotesque circle, their eyes alight with ravenous anticipation. As they lunged toward me, the moon, which had been hidden behind clouds for weeks, made its appearance, bathing everything in an otherworldly light. Their gold teeth glinted under the moonlight, revealing their true form, not human but reanimated corpses kept alive by Mrs. Higgins' unholy pies. A gasp ripped through me as realization hit. The moon was their Achilles heel, while Mrs. Higgins' disgusting dessert kept them alive. In a desperate bid for survival, I seized a shovel and led them on a chase through the town square, scrambling atop an aged statue at its center, just as the moon disappeared behind clouds again. The townsfolk snarled in frustration, their monstrous hunger conflicting with the pull of the moonlight's absence. With one final leap of faith, I landed atop a nearby house just as they turned on one another in a ravenous frenzy. I left Hollow Creek that night with the taste of metallic sweetness lingering on my tongue and screams echoing in my ears, forever ingrained in my memory. While Hollow Creek's residents may have been consumed by their hunger, the secrets remained buried deep within the earth, waiting for the next naive soul to sample the special pie. Late-night growls. The rhythmic chanting began at precisely 3:13 a.m. every night. Not words, but guttural growls that vibrated through the thin walls, emanating from Mr. Crowley's apartment. At first, I dismissed it as late-night karaoke gone wrong, but the melody never changed, and the shadows dancing behind his dusty windowpane took on increasingly disturbing shapes. The enigmatic Mr. Crowley was a puzzle wrapped in a riddle, a solitary figure who had slipped into our neighborhood years before, his arrival heralded by hushed rumors of peculiar habits and alien relics. His existence was largely nocturnal, his only public appearances being his midnight jaunts to the local bookstore specializing in the occult. The recent addition of late-night chants echoing from his dwelling added an extra layer to the unease he inspired. One oppressively dark night, curiosity overcame my fear like a moth irresistibly drawn to a flickering flame. I found myself creeping toward his door, lured by the low, rhythmic drone echoing from within. To my astonishment, the door yielded easily under my touch, revealing an icy gust scented with the sharp tang of incense and an unfamiliar odor that made my nose twitch. His living space was bathed in a sallow light cast by trembling candles that threw monstrous shadows on the flaking wallpaper. Floating dust particles sparkled in midair, caught in an eerie radiance that spilled from a circle and traced onto the well-worn rug. At its heart stood Mr. Crowley himself, eyes shut tight as he recited his chant with an intensity verging on madness. He was garbed in a frayed robe. Strange symbols were etched into his pallid skin in what appeared to be a foreign script. Surrounding the circle were unidentifiable objects pulsating with an otherworldly luminescence. A chill colder than any draft prickled my skin, and I retreated hastily, leaving behind me an open doorway and indelible images seared into my mind. Sleep eluded me during those nights as Mr. Crowley's chanting invaded my dreamscape, morphing into horrific visions of squirming tentacles and nameless gods. My waking hours were consumed by an obsessive need to comprehend what I'd seen. It was as though I was in a tug-of-war between a morbid fascination and the instinctual urge to escape. One afternoon, unable to endure the mounting suspense, I sought solace within the musty confines of the occult bookstore. The proprietor, a woman with penetrating eyes and an inclination for enigmatic statements, listened attentively as I recounted my experiences. "That's an invocation chant used by an ancient cult," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They aim to rip open a passage to a dimension that defies our understanding, a realm steeped in unfathomable darkness." Her revelation sent shivers down my spine. My curiosity had unleashed something dreadful. What I'd seen were merely forerunners of something far more terrifying. Fueled by desperation and armed with her warnings and a crucifix, my feeble shield against this unknown terror, I returned to Mr. Crowley's dwelling that night. As I approached his door left carelessly open, the chanting reached its peak. The atmosphere was electric. It felt like reality itself was on the brink of rupture. I stormed in, brandishing my crucifix like some ill-equipped knight facing an invisible foe. Mr. Crowley's eyes flung open, blazing with an unholy light. The symbols adorning his skin glowed blood red. The air around him shimmered while the objects encircling him emitted blinding flashes of light. A swirling vortex formed at the room's center. Terror rendered me immobile when from this portal emerged a monstrous being, tentacles flailing wildly and teeth gnashing ferociously. Mr. Crowley's laughter echoed ominously around us, imbued with a power that seemed capable of shaking the building's very foundations. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, the bookstore owner appeared behind me, her eyes ablaze with arcane energy as she chanted counterspells using symbols tattooed on her arms. The room flooded with a celestial light, challenging the darkness spilling from the portal. The struggle was colossal. The air hung heavy with the palpable tension of opposing forces. The creature roared, its form flickering as it wrestled against her magic. Mr. Crowley's screams filled the air, laced with torment as he was drawn toward the rapidly shrinking portal. With a final surge of power, the portal shut, the air sizzling as the darkness retreated. Mr. Crowley fell to the floor, unconscious, his skin now marked only by faded scars where symbols once glowed. The bookstore owner and I collapsed in exhaustion under the weight of a narrowly averted catastrophe. Mr. Crowley vanished without a trace after that night, but not before leaving behind a permanent scar on my psyche, a chilling reminder of my brush with an unspeakable terror. Now when I hear whispers in the wind rustling through dead leaves, I can't shake off the remembrance of the horrific night I peered into an abyss, and it stared right back at me. Trapped in the jungle's embrace, what had once been an exhilarating journey through the dense, humid labyrinth of the Amazon rainforest, alongside my friends, now felt like a stifling dungeon. Its walls and bars were composed of relentless emerald foliage that seemed to choke out any hope of escape. Our audacious decision to navigate this boundless wilderness had led us astray, ensnaring us in a never-ending maze woven from lush, vibrant life. Days blurred into a single monotonous period, their individuality devoured by the all-encompassing jungle. The chorus of exotic birds and unseen insects that had initially captivated us now reverberated around us as a cruel taunt, a twisted parody of our predicament. Hunger was our constant tormentor, gnawing at our insides with animalistic ferocity, while fear coiled around our hearts like a deadly anaconda preparing for its lethal strike. We stumbled upon an unnerving clearing as the sun sank beneath the horizon, obscured by towering canopies, casting spectral shadows on our path. It was eerily silent compared to the constant hum of life surrounding it. At its heart stood an ancient altar covered in moss that radiated both a magnetic and unsettling aura. The obsidian stone was etched with grotesque figures, seemingly trapped in eternal agony. "What is this?" I murmured to myself. I was the group's self-appointed historian, but I'd never seen anything like this before. As we tiptoed closer, a low moan echoed across the clearing. It was followed by another sound, then more, until it seemed as if the jungle itself was screaming out in shared suffering. Panic seized us. We frantically rummaged through our backpacks as our flashlights illuminated a horrifying sight, figures shuffling towards us. Their clothes were tattered remnants clinging onto their pallid, decaying bodies, their eyes hollow pits of emptiness. These weren't your typical bedtime story zombies, but something far more terrifying, birthed from ancient secrets buried deep within this forest. With shocking speed, they lunged at us, their chilling moans morphing into guttural growls. Pandemonium erupted. Liam, who had always been our courageous leader, stumbled over a jutting root and his scream ricocheted around us as they descended on him like vultures on a fresh carcass. We scattered, adrenaline fueling our movements as primal survival instincts took control. I managed to scramble up the towering trunk of a kapok tree, ignoring the rough bark scraping against my skin. From my elevated perch, I watched in petrified horror as my friends were devoured by the ravenous creatures, their screams piercing through the merciless jungle. Time lost all relevance as I sat there amidst the terrifying cacophony of moaning and flesh being torn apart. Clinging to hope like a lifeline, I watched as a single decaying figure emerged from the carnage below and headed toward my tree, its vacant eyes locked on me. Tears streamed down my face as I realized there was no escape. As the fiend started its ascent up the trunk, I grabbed a loose branch above me and snapped it off in desperation. With one last prayer whispered into the night air, I swung at its head. The impact was sickening, but did nothing to deter it. Instead, it let out a deafening shriek that filled the entire clearing. The shriek wasn't for me. It was a call, drawing more of them from deep in the forest heartland. They flooded the clearing with what seemed like thousands, drawn by that final cry. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as they turned toward me. The uncanny glow of torches lit the way as one figure larger than the rest emerged adorned with grim jewelry made from human bones. It was their king overseeing the gruesome feast. Its voice boomed through the space, sending a fresh wave of chills down my spine. "Welcome, sacrifice," it rasped. "You have awakened us. Now join our eternal feast." The shriek that tore from my throat was a raw, guttural gasp, bouncing off the canopy of trees as I tumbled from the branch I'd been clinging to. The impact with the forest floor was jarring, every nerve ending in my body screaming out in agony. Dazed and disoriented, I scrambled blindly at the leaf-littered ground, seeking something solid to anchor myself to. But all I found was a chilling sense of dread. The cruel laughter of the king resounded through the undergrowth, a haunting reminder of my vulnerability. With adrenaline pumping through my veins like liquid fire, I forced myself up onto shaky legs and staggered forward. But between the pulsing pain in my temple and the sharp sting of what felt like a deep gash in my calf, the movement was torturous. My desperate flight felt more like a stumble toward an inevitable end, rather than an escape attempt. The jungle pressed in on me from all sides, its dense underbrush forming an intricate maze filled with unseen threats. Roots twisted up from beneath layers of fallen leaves to trip me, while vines hung low from branches overhead, striking me with their thorny lengths as they swung back and forth. The symphony of sounds in this tropical nightmare changed its tune to one more ominous. It wasn't just nocturnal creatures stirring anymore, but also the eerie echoes of those pursuing me. Their growls were low and guttural, sounds no living creature should make. My shirt barely clung to my frame after being ripped by brambles and thorns. My sweat-soaked skin exposed to whatever else lurked in the shadows. Fear nipped at my heels like a rabid animal as I pushed through thickets and ferns that seemed hell-bent on holding me back. The once vibrant rainforest no longer felt like a sanctuary teeming with life. The putrid stench of decay replaced the sweet fragrance of blooming orchids. As I broke through the dense foliage, my feet stumbled onto the rocky bank of a raging river. The water roared and crashed against the jagged boulders, carving its way through the unforgiving wilderness. I scanned the treacherous currents for any hint of a safe passage. I knew I didn't have the strength to fight against the currents, but it was my only chance at escaping this hellhole. Just as I was about to make my move toward the water, an icy grip closed around my ankle. I fell forward, my skin scraping against rough pebbles. Twisting around, the moonlight illuminated the grotesque face of one of them. Its skeletal fingers tightened their hold on me as it pulled me closer to its gaping maw. My hands clawed at the rocky ground for something, anything, that could serve as a weapon but came up empty. The pain that followed its first bite was indescribable. Every nerve in my body was set ablaze while darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. As life slipped away from me, a horrifying thought took root. Death wasn't just about dying, it meant becoming one of them. My spirit wouldn't find peace or oblivion but would remain within the trees and vines of this cursed place, another piece in a twisted puzzle of damnation. There would be no solitude here, only an endless cycle of souls led to their inevitable fate. The thought sent ice-cold fear coursing through me even as the warm blood drained from my wounds. Genuine terror lay not merely in the act of perishing, but in the chilling, unfathomable mysteries that lurk beyond the veil of death. And death wasn't an end. It was simply a new beginning, an eternal nightmare from which there is no waking up.